Well, something to free. Splash flow, let's wake to the surface of our minds. When we see a realm of a world, we can see plainly with mortalized. What truly becomes of our mind? Maybe I'm without the brightness of ours. Thoughts that are things of the stars
Soviet researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment and carefully monitored. Their oxygen intake was regulated so the gas didn't kill them. The chamber was stocked with books, had running water along with a toilet. There were also cots to sleep on, no bedding, along with enough dried food rations to last all 5 subjects for over a month. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The researchers noted that, with each passing day, the subjects spoke increasingly about traumatic incidents in their past. They discussed things usually hidden deep within the psyche, not easily revealed to strangers. After 5 days, they increasingly demonstrated severe paranoia. Soon, they stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and peeking through the one-way mirrored portals in the chamber. After 9 days, the first of the subjects started screaming, as though he were in mortal danger. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs. After this prolonged behavior went on for what seemed like hours, he continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most startling thing about this behavior was the other subject's reaction to it, or rather, lack thereof. They continued whispering to the microphones until another started to scream. The 2 who remained silent calmly took the books in the chamber apart, smeared page after page with their own filth, and pasted them carefully over the glass portals. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering into the microphones. The chamber went silent. On the morning of the 14th day, in an attempt to get a reaction from the subjects, the researchers did something they had initially agreed not to. They used the intercom inside the chamber to speak directly to the subjects. The lead researcher nervously announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will have one of you your immediate freedom." To the researcher's surprise, a calm voice responded with a single phrase. "We no longer want to be free. We 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 no longer want to be free." We no longer want to be free.
Days go by so slowly, watching the overrun, clicking around, counting down. I am laying empty spots, close my eyes and never see them close. We are being sleep deprived. I like to hear lyrics of voice inside deep in the darkest parts of my mind. A voice that's not my own. Did we awaken something new? Did we awaken something old? Did we awaken something that should have been said? Tells me a thing round. That voice is getting louder, getting near. It is echoing in my ear. Tells me to dig my nails into the flesh. The wheels of here to expose the bastard bones, free the organs from their confinement of useless meat and skin. Rise, scream, yourselves as the voice of madness, not voices laughing, there's tearing skin, tearing away yourself, just as the rest of us, step on us, down out, fresh, serious and fresh. Singing that is your law. Singing like me, that's all. Yes, that voice on the wall. For the ones watching, you hear the voice at all. I must stay awake, wide blue secrets will I build upon the wall.
The 15th day. When the clock struck midnight, the chamber was flushed with the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air. Immediately, voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the lives of their loved ones, for the gas to be turned back on. Undeterred by these protests, the researchers ordered the chamber opened and soldiers were sent in to remove the subjects when they saw what was inside the chamber. Only 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, and of those 4, what remained made several of the soldiers recoil and vomit.
I hear the voice laughing as I laugh with it. I think it's tone I gnaw upon my fingertips. The blood pulling around. I sharpen my fingers with my teeth. My flesh will be like poetry, watching the others tear chunks of flesh from the dead one. He must have fell asleep. I must stay awake, I must see the one's voice. I must see the realm, it has to overwhelm. I mustn't fall asleep, I must stay awake. Wait, watching, you can hear the voice at all. Smearing blood and flesh upon the wall. The ones watching, do they hear the voice at all? Must stay awake, writing secrets with my phone. I must stay awake, I must achieve enlightenment. I must see the face of the voice. I must stay awake, I fucking must. Hear the ones who are watching guys read the messages and all. Do we have to spell it out? The one upon the floor is still alive, pride and laughing. Lips curled into a hellish grin. He says he sees the owner of the voice. It comes to me now to take me to its heaven. I have achieved enlightenment, blood pulling high underneath me. Spiders, he's still smiling the world. I must see this world, I must see this realm. May it overwhelm the senses of the mind. May it be as though it says. For the ones watching, do we hear the voice at all? For the ones watching, do we hear the voice at all? For the ones watching, do we hear the voice at all? Voice at all. The others tear the new chunks of the flesh of the bone. The cage exposed, lungs flexing your rights. With messages upon the wall. I wonder if the ones watching, do they hear the voice at all?
Subject had been torn to pieces. There were chunks of flesh from his thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, thoroughly blocking it. This had allowed 4 inches of soupy red fluid to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the detritus on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies as well. the destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips was initially believed to be caused by teeth. It was later determined to have been caused by using their fingers to pierce their own flesh. Closer examination of the position and angle of the wounds on the dead subject indicated they were mostly self-inflicted. The heart, lungs, and diaphragm of one of the subjects remained in place in his chest, but the skin and most of the soft tissue attached to the ribs had been ripped off. This exposed the lungs to the ribcage. All the blood vessels and internal organs from below the ribcage remained intact. However, they were no longer inside his body. His organs had been removed and laid on the floor. They had been fanned out in random piles around the eviscerated but still somehow living body of the subject. The digestive tract of the unfortunate was spread out across the length of the chamber. They could be seen to still be digesting food, pulsing and contracting on the floor. It quickly became apparent that what was being digested was the subject's own flesh. Few of the soldiers, after being threatened, gave in to their superiors' demands and began to remove the subjects one by one. All the while, the subjects continued to scream to be left in the chamber. They ultimately begged and then demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. One of the soldiers died from throat injuries, and another was gravely injured when the subject attacked his groin, severing an artery in the soldier's leg with his teeth. In total, 7 soldiers lost their lives. 2 were massacred that day, and 5 more followed, committing suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, the spleen of one of the subjects was ruptured, and he began to bleed out faster because of his trauma. The medical team attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. The subject was injected with more than 10 times the dose of a morphine derivative, considered to be lethal to humans, and he continued to fight like a cornered animal. His feral thrashings broke the ribs and arm of an attending doctor. Technically, he bled to death, yet the subject's heart still continued to beat for another 2 full minutes. When the subject's heart finally stopped beating, he began to scream and flail wildly, struggling to attack anyone within his reach. He repeated the word "more" over and over, becoming weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent minutes later. The surviving 3 subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with the intact vocal cords continued begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake.
One gathering the regulating up against the door. Break through the looking glass, through the ones watching us. Hear the voice, do they care at all? So they need a door opening. The door opens to begin. The horrors inside this room, voices screaming are dim. They can take you away from the nightmare. Kill them, sit there oddities with your teeth. Claw their flesh from their bones. Show them what you can do. Show them what you really are. As also watching the others turn to them. Can they read the messages upon the wall? I must stay awake, I have to see the realm. I truly hope it overwhelms. I must stay awake, I have to stay awake. They mustn't take me away. I'm so close to seeing the voice's face. I put on my faith in it. Come to it as they carry me out. I must stay awake, I'm so close, I must stay. Put me back, I have to stay away.
When they arrived, the most severely injured of the three were taken immediately to the only surgical operating room the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back inside his body, he fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was applied to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even with a 100-kilogram soldier, adding his weight atop his chest. It took quite a bit more tranquilizer than normal to calm the subject. The instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped, and he seized wildly. The autopsy would later show that his blood had highly toxic levels of oxygen. His muscles were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be put to sleep. Most of the breaks in his bones were from the force his own muscles had exerted on him. The second survivor had been the first of the 5 subjects to start screaming in the beginning of the experiment. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to verbally object to the surgery. He reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when the surgeon suggested reluctantly that they try to operate without anesthetic. Over the entire course of a 6-hour procedure to repair damage due to self-mutilation, he didn't even blink. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation due to the patient laughing continuously. The decision was made to inject him with a paralytic to prevent his muscles from moving. Once paralyzed, the subject could only follow the medical team with his eyes. However, the calm did not last as the epidural cleared the subject's system in an abnormally short period of time. He was soon trying to escape his bonds once again and motioning for the stimulant gas. The researchers asked why they had injured themselves, why they had eviscerated themselves. The military officials asked why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: must remain awake, must remain awake, must remain awake, must remain awake.
They are taking us away from our lovely decorated room. I'm strapped down to a table of cold steel. They are putting me back together. They see my messages from the flesh. The voices speaks, yet I still keep saying, cut me more. You can't get away, is what the voice says. Hear my own voice, it is blabbing. I must stay awake, I must see the realm, I must achieve enlightenment. I must see the face of the voice. I must stay awake, I fucking must. Something primal once free. The shit is clear to fucking see. And I am its chosen vessel of the birth into our reality. I must set the voice free. For it is free me from the confines of humanity. Binds and chains place upon dark corners in our mind. Oh, I must remain awake. I will see the face of the voice as it's born through me. Screams, it is nearly free. Put me back in my room, I must stay awake. I can sleep again when you see the call, overwhelming the call of the voice. Oh, I mustn't let the voice down, I must set it free. Into our realm with screams and angers, one of the enlightenment felt to slumber blood started sprang from his eyes, sprang from his body. It was so beautiful. Sleep was coming upon me. I feel a strong pull and it's overwhelming. The voices screaming, stay awake. But I'm so close to the blood I seek, so close to enlightenment. My eyes closed and I'm screaming no, 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 no.
They were placed into a holding chamber to await a determination as to what should be done with them, considered euthanizing the surviving monstrosities. The commanding military officer instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if the subjects were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. Both stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious at this point that they were extremely desperate to stay awake. A single nurse saw the subject's eyes slip shut one final time. At this point, the subject's brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep. This was followed by a surge, and then silence from the machine as his heartbeat ceased. As soon as his brainwaves subsided, his seizure began, and he was suddenly spraying blood from every open wound. The remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in immediately. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as the recently dead subject. To the horror of the researchers, the attending military commander gave an order to his subordinate to seal the chamber, with both the live and dead subjects inside, as well as the three researchers. The remaining members of the research team began beating on the sealed door.
I won't be locked in here with these things! Not with you!
Screamed the now trembling armed researcher at the remaining subject strapped to the table.
What are you?
He demanded.
I must know.
The subject smiled.
Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest human mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis. When you go to the nocturnal haven, we cannot tread.
The researcher paused, aimed the pistol at his own temple, and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out.
My remaining sides still split and rip itself apart. Looking at me, he simply asked, what are you? Does he see the face? Does he finally hear the voice? Hear its call? I hear the voice. Apply to the matter right, telling him things, showing him, telling him we were so close to finally being free. Now since the dawn of humanity hasn't seen I never voice, never set it free. I say one last thing to the voice. I say it in his language, smile appears in my mind. It is haunting, a war in his place upon my soul. Is this it? Will it let me be enlightened? everlasting appeal to unseen beast, dragging my soul to its home, a place of voice caused by many names. It's a vast black abyss overwhelming the light in my soul. This isn't what I wanted, the voice it goes on. It just wanted me freed from this reality. It just wanted to feed upon our souls. Now it has me, it has us all lost forever in this black abyss. This realm has enough light lost forever. This black abyss, it burns in the light. It's all in now. I hear them all laughing, the voices piercing the dark, echoing the voices laughing at me. They are laughing, all laughing. They are laughing, all laughing. I smile and laugh with this is what mankind is. Vessels to a realm that overwhelm your humanity, your primal instinct, empty embraces of your mind to hide from the light. Does it always lurking there, waiting there, moving unseen, but felt and heard it moving in dreams? This is what happens if we deprive our bodies and minds of sleep. Something will begin to creep, something begin to move unseen. We will see the realm of insanity, the vanity that we can't plainly see with our mortal eyes. What has become of our mind? We will achieve breaking something that ain't been seen since the dawn of time. Wanting our reality to be infected with madness. This is what happens when you deprive your bodies and minds of sleep. Something primal, something evil lurks there, waiting to be seized.